January 1985, Rio de Janeiro. Queen had arrived in Brazil for what would become one of the largest and most logistically complex outdoor performances of the band's career, part of the inaugural Rock in Rio festival, a massive undertaking that had assembled temporary stage infrastructure on a scale that pushed the technical limits of what touring production teams in the mid-1980s typically attempted. And in the hours preceding Queen's scheduled performance, according to the account of an unnamed stage engineer who has discussed this period only through limited and carefully guarded testimony, a specific structural concern emerged that nearly prevented the show from proceeding at all. The engineer, whose specific identity has never been confirmed through any primary source willing to speak on the record, has described, in the fragments of testimony that have reached researchers, a routine structural inspection conducted several hours before the scheduled performance that identified stress patterns in a section of the elevated stage platform that concerned him considerably more than the assurances offered by the local production team responsible for the temporary structures assembly. This particular section of stage, according to the engineer's account, would bear substantial weight during the performance, not simply from the band members themselves, but from the elaborate lighting rigging and speaker arrays that Queen's touring production had specified for the show. Equipment considerably heavier and more extensive than what the temporary Brazilian infrastructure had originally been engineered to support based on the engineer's own calculations, performed independently of the assurances he had received from the local team. The engineer has described bringing his concerns directly to Queen's tour management in the hours before the performance, a specific and urgent conversation that he has characterized, across the limited testimony available, as one of the more difficult professional moments of his entire touring career. Understanding the enormous financial and logistical stakes involved in any potential cancellation or delay of a performance that tens of thousands of people had already gathered to attend, while simultaneously feeling professionally obligated to voice a safety concern he genuinely believed carried real risk. Tour management, according to this account, took the concerns seriously enough to arrange a direct conversation between the engineer and Freddie Mercury personally, a specific escalation that the engineer has said surprised him somewhat, given that safety and technical concerns of this nature typically remained within the production team's internal decision-making structure rather than reaching individual band members directly, but that reflected, according to his understanding, Freddie's well-documented insistence on being personally informed of any significant risk that might affect either the performance itself or the safety of the people involved in producing it. I told him exactly what I'd found, the engineer has said. According to the version of this account that has proven most consistent across the fragmentary testimony available, the stress patterns, my concerns about the additional weight load, my honest assessment that I couldn't guarantee the platform would hold under the full combined weight of the performance equipment and the band's movement across it. I expected him to want more information, more time, maybe a delay while we brought in additional support structure. What I didn't expect was for him to ask me a single question that had nothing to do with the engineering at all. The question, according to the engineer's account, involved Freddie asking directly how many people had already gathered in the audience area waiting for the performance, a specific inquiry that the engineer has said struck him as unusual given the technical nature of the conversation they had been having. And when he provided his best estimate, a crowd already numbering well into the tens of thousands based on the festival's advanced ticket sales and the visible density of the gathered audience, Freddie's response, according to this account, addressed not the engineering risk directly, but a different calculation entirely, one weighing the specific and immediate disappointment and potential danger of attempting to disperse or delay an already massive assembled crowd against the structural risk the engineer had identified. The engineer has described Freddie asking a series of additional practical questions, whether the specific section of concern could be reinforced or avoided through adjusted staging or blocking that would keep the heaviest equipment and the most concentrated foot traffic away from the identified weak points. Questions that the engineer has characterized as demonstrating a considerably more sophisticated understanding of practical risk management than he had expected from a performer whose professional expertise obviously lay in entirely different territory. He wasn't dismissing what I'd told him, the engineer has said, in the account that has circulated most consistently. He took it completely seriously, but he also wasn't willing to simply cancel or delay without exploring every possible way to make it work safely first. And the questions he asked, they were the right questions. The kind of questions that told me he genuinely understood what I was actually worried about, rather than just wanting reassurance that would let him do what he'd already decided to do. Working together across the following hour, according to the engineer's account, he and Freddie, along with several members of the production crew who had been brought into the conversation, developed a modified staging plan that would concentrate the heaviest equipment and the most significant foot traffic away from the section of greatest structural concern. A compromise that the engineer has said he ultimately found professionally acceptable, though he has also indicated that he communicated clearly to Freddie and to tour management that this modified plan represented a managed risk rather than a fully resolved safety concern. Freddie's specific reasoning for wanting to proceed with the performance rather than accepting a delay or cancellation, according to the engineer's account, centered on a consideration that extended beyond the band's own professional and financial interests, addressing instead what Freddie apparently characterized as a specific obligation to the already gathered audience, many of whom, according to Freddie's understanding, relayed through the engineer's account, had traveled considerable distances and made substantial personal sacrifices to attend a performance that represented, for the Brazilian audience specifically, one of the first major international rock performances of this scale to occur in their country. He said something about how disappointing them, especially given how much this show meant to people who genuinely couldn't easily see this kind of performance any other way, felt like its own kind of risk. A risk to something he cared about just as much as physical safety, even if it wasn't the same kind of risk, the engineer has recounted, though he has also emphasized, across every version of this account he has offered, that Freddie never suggested prioritizing the show over genuine safety, insisting instead on finding the specific combination of modified staging and continued careful monitoring that would allow the performance to proceed without what the engineer, drawing on his own professional judgment, considered unacceptable risk. The performance proceeded as scheduled, according to every available account of Queen's actual rock in Rio appearance, a show that has been extensively documented through surviving footage and that remains, among the band's extensive touring history, one of the more significant and celebrated performances of this particular era, drawing a crowd whose exact size has been estimated at well over 100,000 people across the festival's full attendance, a scale that dwarfed most of the venues Queen had performed in across their European and North American touring history to that point. The specific structural concern that had prompted the engineer's urgent pre-show conversation with Freddie never materialized into any actual incident during the performance itself, the modified staging plan apparently proving sufficient to manage whatever genuine risk the identified stress patterns had represented, though the engineer has said, across his limited testimony, that he monitored the structure continuously throughout the performance with what he has characterized as considerable ongoing tension, understanding that his professional assessment had been managed rather than fully resolved, and that the performance's ultimate safety depended on a combination of the modifications implemented and, to some degree that he has acknowledged, made him professionally uncomfortable, even in retrospect, genuine good fortune. What makes this particular story significant within the broader context of Freddie Mercury's documented approach to live performance is the specific decision-making process it illustrates, a willingness to seriously engage with genuine safety concerns rather than dismissing them in favor of commercial or logistical convenience, paired with an equally genuine reluctance to simply cancel or delay without first exhausting every reasonable alternative that might allow the performance to proceed for an audience whose disappointment Freddie apparently weighed as a genuine and significant cost in its own right. This particular balance, taking safety concerns seriously while maintaining strong commitment to delivering performances audiences had traveled and sacrificed to attend, aligns coherently with a broader pattern documented across numerous separate accounts from crew members and collaborators who worked with Freddie across his touring career. A consistent characterization of someone who understood live performance as carrying genuine reciprocal obligation between performer and audience, an obligation he apparently took seriously enough to personally engage with technical and safety considerations that many performers of his stature would likely have delegated entirely to production management without any direct personal involvement. The engineer has said, across the limited testimony he has offered regarding this period, that he never worked directly with Queen again following this particular tour, his subsequent career taking him into different areas of the touring and events industry, but that he has thought often, across the decades since, about that specific pre-show conversation, characterizing it as one of the more professionally significant interactions of his entire career, precisely because of the specific quality of engaged, informed collaboration Freddie brought to a conversation that could easily have been handled through considerably less personal and considerably less thorough channels. Brian May and Roger Taylor have never publicly addressed this specific incident in any interview where researchers have confirmed the question was directly posed, though the general absence of confirmation from other band members carries somewhat limited evidentiary weight in this particular case, given that the conversation, according to the engineer's own account, occurred primarily between himself and Freddie directly, with tour management present but without necessarily involving the other three band members in the specific technical discussion that determined how the performance's staging would ultimately be modified. Whether this specific account accurately represents the full complexity of whatever genuine technical concerns arose during Queen's preparation for their historic Rock in Rio appearance, or whether it represents a narrative that has accumulated additional dramatic weight across decades of informal retelling among people connected to the touring production industry. The underlying suggestion the story offers, a performer whose commitment to his audience extended into genuine engagement with the practical mechanics of ensuring performances could proceed both safely and as scheduled, remains consistent with the broader and more extensively documented understanding of exactly how seriously Freddie Mercury apparently approached every dimension of the enormous reciprocal relationship between himself and the audiences who had, across more than a decade by that point in his career, made his entire extraordinary career possible.